Everybody needs this. We have further developed this theory in that if you are a fetus in the womb and you are under a constant barrage of poison, which is refined sugar without these flavonoids, if you are a fetus in the womb, your body is going to try to respond by stopping that infiltration, invasion of this poison. And ultimately, it means you will be born with type 1 diabetes. You know, everything is, of course, nature or nurture, your own DNA. So not everyone who smokes develops lung cancer, but there's a strong connection between smoking and lung cancer. So not everyone will develop type 1 diabetes, but it's our theory that that's where that comes from. Your body is trying to stop processing this poison, which is glucose, without these cofactors, so it eventually kills its own pancreas. It's an autoimmune response. If you made it past the being in the womb and now you're an adolescent and you're still exposed to this poison constantly, ultimately your body will not respond to insulin because it's trying to not take this poison up. So then you become insulin insensitive. That's type 2 diabetes. The third step is over your life, you may have avoided type 1, you may have avoided type 2 diabetes, but ultimately your body cannot take it any longer, and the result is type 3 diabetes, which is Alzheimer's. So you can, any of you look that up on PubMed, and Alzheimer's is now being called type 3 diabetes. It is dysfunctional carbohydrate metabolism in the brain. And in most instances, the only food for the brain is glucose. And if you mess that up, you end up with the symptoms that we've called now Alzheimer's. So, can everyone still hear me okay?
Yes, doctor. Can I interrupt and get a question in?
Of course you can.
Okay, good. So I wanted everybody, including the health professionals, to have you speak for a minute about the distinction between sucrose, glucose, and fructose, and how, you know, the real deadly part, the fructose, is causing us as much problem as it is. Can you address that dichotomy for a minute?
Well, sure I can. Okay. So sucrose is a dimer. Sucrose is one molecule of glucose and one molecule of fructose joined together. And those occur in plants such as sugarcane and sugar beets. And that's where we get table sugar from. It's about the only place that comes from. Sugarcane, sugar beets. It's one molecule of glucose hooked together with a molecule of fructose. Fructose itself is named that because it was first identified in fruits. It's basically fruit sugar. A little bit of it, and also it's absorbed differently and is processed differently in the liver. A relatively moderate, small amount of fructose is just fine for your body. And I want to say that again, because fructose is not an enemy by itself. Just like glucose, which is the sugar of your blood that you have to live. Blood sugar is not the enemy. It is glucose, blood sugar, without these bioflavonoids that cause the body to perceive it as a poison, leading to inflammation and a myriad of diseases. Fructose by itself, in the right amounts, is very healthy, and your liver can handle it. Okay. The problem is high fructose corn syrup. That's a whole different ballgame. This is a synthetic formula which is supercharged, turbocharged molecules of fructose at such a high concentration that it completely destroys the liver, because the liver cannot handle it. And you end up getting the same diseases as if you were an alcoholic. Basically, fatty liver disease, streaks in the liver. It's just like a fire that consumes the liver. So fructose itself, taken from oranges, pineapples, apples, healthy products for you, they are at the right concentration. Your body easily processes them, no issues. High fructose corn syrup is like setting your liver on fire, and it basically burns it up and scars it. That's the issue. So sucrose is a molecule of glucose attached to fructose. We take much more of that than our body was ever designed to take. You know, back just 1,000 years ago, sugar cane, which is full of sucrose because it's a C4 plant, we didn't eat a lot of it, and it was okay. Now we consume it in everything we eat. Even if you're very careful, you can't avoid the added sugar in our foods. And as like I mentioned earlier, we used to eat 100 years ago, the turn of the century, in the previous century. I'm 65, so that I got 2 centuries to go back. At the turn in the 1900s, we were eating just a couple of pounds of this a year. Now we're up into, in some societies, 200 pounds of this a year. This is ridiculous, and our bodies can't handle it. Plus, because it's refined, our body thinks it's a poison. So that is the issue there. And then fructose, same way. It was okay. Eat it in an orange, an apple, even celery has fructose in it. It's fine. High fructose corn syrup is a nightmare. And it sets your liver on fire, and it ends up with just scar tissue.
So, Doctor, we recognize that high fructose corn syrup is the villain, and it's the reason it was first developed by the Japanese in the mid '60s. It came to the States in the early '70s, and it really made it into the food supply in a big way after the introduction of the food pyramid in 1980 that favored reduction of fat versus reduction of sugar. So we know that corporations all over the world have gone to town with crazy amounts of this, and all you have to do is look at the corn production in Iowa and many other states and many other countries to see how much corn is grown that is not actually being used as corn or feed for animals. It's being put into this high fructose corn syrup. That's not likely to change anytime soon. And so it behooves us to do what, we're suggesting that people do, and that's take these phytonutrients that you provided in Emulin to counteract that. So that's one issue. The other issue is I'd like you to maybe say a word or two about all these sugar substitutes, the Splendas and the NutraSweets and the Stevias. Which ones work, in the body, and does Emulin have any effect on them?
Well, there's 2 types of sugar substitutes. And one of them is, they're all theoretically low calorie. So things taste sweet, more or less they taste sweet, and they don't have any calories. There's a couple of issues there. One of them is that the earlier ones in particular were quite nasty chemicals. They tricked your body into thinking something was sweet without chemicals, but they had some side effects, including causing cancer.
Right.
We don't use those much anymore. We use things like Splenda, which is a reverse sugar. So your body tastes it and it tastes sweet, but it has no calories in it. And it is very close to a natural molecule. So I'm not going to knock that. It was a fantastic discovery. Then we have stevia, which is not a sugar, but it causes your tongue to sense sweetness. So it's not a fake sugar, synthetic sugar. It just happens to stimulate your nerves in your tongue to think that something is sweet.
That's very interesting.
That sounds great. And it's a natural compound. We actually, in Florida, as boys, we used to take stevia and mix it with lemon juice and to make lemonade. We did it, you know, in the groves. I came up in a farm family with a citrus grove. We did that commonly. And okay, that's not so bad. The problem is, of course, you got the one group that can actually be carcinogenic. The other one is that when your body senses sweetness, it actually goes ahead and scavenges any sugar that happens to be there, and you can actually end up still gaining weight because it makes the body more efficient, if that makes any sense to people. So you have insulin, which is, if you get a certain level, a spike in glucose in your bloodstream, insulin, that is sensed, and insulin goes out into your blood, and it looks for any sugar, and it tries to put it in the fat tissue. That's the function of insulin. It looks for excess sugar and pumps it into fat tissue.
So when go ahead. Mm-hmm.
And when you have a synthetic sweet tasting molecule, even though it's not a sugar, your brain alerts the body that there's sugar here, even if there's not. And then it hypes it up, and insulin goes out grabbing every possible sugar it can. So you end up getting a lot of calories pumped into fat cells regardless of whether it was low calorie or not. So it's kind of, this has been a discovery, was probably made about 6 years ago, that artificial sweeteners still can cause you to gain weight because it amplifies the insulin response.
That is definitely shocking information that I have never heard that. And I think it'd be very useful to for us to know that particular aspect of these sugar substitutes that counterintuitively to actually reducing your caloric intake or weight gain, they cause the opposite by the brain being faked out, as it were, and triggering an insulin spike to actually find them and put them into the adipose or fat tissue. I want to address the question that always comes up, because a lot of people have experienced weight loss or inches lost, and so many people kind of perceive this product as potentially a weight reduction compound. How does the leakage of glucose from fat cells happen? And first of all, talking about fat cells, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that when a person is born, there are a certain number of fat cells, and that's the number of fat cells you will die with. The issue is that they expand or retract rather than adding additional fat cells. Is that true?
Well, it's somewhat true that you actually can make new fat cells, but in general, it's about the growth of fat tissue.
Okay.
It's a real generalized statement to say the same number we have when we're born, we stay with, but we have found out that you can make new fat cells. But number one, the most consequence is that yes, fat tissues expand. Tissues go through a G1, G2, G3, and G4 phase. And the biggest, most important to us, talking about the weight management, is the expansion. not the growth so much as the expansion of these fat cells. So quercetin in this product, quercetin by itself, without myristotin or chlorogenic acid, quercetin causes glucose and triglycerides to leak back out of fat tissue. So I can take you and have you fast for 24 hours, come into my office 9 a.m., and I will take a blood sample from you, and you might have 90 as a number. And I can give you quercetin, and over the next 3 or 4 hours, your blood sugar will increase. This study was actually done in Russia some decades ago, and we neglected it for a while. Our first study had we used a lot more quercetin, and we gave people this compound, the Emulin, the first Emulin, the Pro Emulin, and people's blood sugar actually increased. And then we did trace it back to the fact that quercetin causes glucose and triglycerides to leak out. It's a term, it's called lipolysis, and that's another thing. You can just look on PubMed and quercetin, lipolysis as the keywords, and some papers will come up that prove that. And so that's really important. If you are in a flight or fight syndrome, you need energy, you need sugar. And having the diet that we were intended to have thousands of years ago, I would surmise, that this was important. It was important for energy to be readily available to you. Well, we have added quercetin to the formula to cause just enough of glucose to come out of the cells, but not too much. If you are diabetic, you don't want to raise your blood sugar. We don't want that. But we do want to drive down fat tissue, because all of us have too much fat. And a little quercetin in there causes the glucose to come out of the fat tissue, and the myristotin helps it get into muscle tissue. It's like two guys there. One of them's bringing the glucose out, and the other one's pushing it into muscle tissue. That's why the formula itself is really important. It's not just eat more flavonoids. It's this particular combination that we have found so helpful. You will lose weight, but you will also gain muscle mass. The very act of glucose going into muscle tissue causes muscle cells to multiply. That's pretty well known in exercise physiology. You need carbohydrates to increase muscle mass. And you can force the equation by putting glucose into the muscles. This is why some people do not lose weight, but they do notice a reduced waist size, a reduced thighs, a reduced chest measurement, because muscle tissue is much more dense than fat tissue. You know, a piece of steak goes to the bottom of a glass of water and the fat rises, so it's density. And some people say, I do have weight loss. Others say, I haven't lost any weight, but my pants are looser. And we actually did a study on that a couple of years ago, and we found out that there was less fat and more muscle mass in people. Even in those that did not change their weight dramatically, they lost over a month up to 19% of body measurement. That is their waist. Their waist went from, these were obese people, their waist went from like 60 down to 48.